Is it dying? Is that why it's in here?
No, I think it's just got trapped from the sea, hasn't it?
There's loads of them washed up on the beach.
Yeah, I've seen some of those. Not that big though.
Oh my god!
That's
I've
a
never seen
beast.
one in person ever.
Not live, you mean?
Yeah, not live.
Yeah, I haven't seen one that big before.
That's ridiculous.
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah. Has that been there a while then, or did you just spot it that second?
I
Right.
see you looking at the fish.
Yeah.
And I thought you'd obviously want to see that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that's
Oh
cool.
my gosh.
Lily had
That is ridiculous.
Lily had a puppy for dinner.
Jeez, look at he's probably like, help me. Oh, that's huge.
If you walk, are you here on holiday?
No, we were just from Exeter. Yeah, so we just popped down
If
for.
you walk down by Pirates Cove, like if you walk all the way round,
Yeah.
you can literally see them. They're that far from the beach.
Oh right.
Tip
Right.
it, MJ, that's ridiculous. Oh my god. What? Oh my god. Well, if someone's find his way out now.
Oh, that's it. It's gone.
Oh my gosh.
Can't believe it. There was one last night on the beach and it was so huge. Oh my god.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike, and as you've just seen, some giant jellyfish invaded Exmouth. Pretty unusual to see them swimming live, but we're just having a quick look at some thumbnail sketches which are related to the painting we're going to do today. But let me just show you a little bit more of the jellyfish, and I'll explain the relevance in a minute. So a few quick biro sketches there.
Another one.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god. That's not right.
Now I'm on a pad of A3 mixed media paper, and I'm starting out with a neon orange marker. And we'll come back to the jellyfish and their relevance in just a moment, but just bear with me for the next few seconds. So I'm starting out with this orange marker because I remembered a few weeks ago I painted a steer, and I started with orange outline there. And I really liked the contrast of the blue of the animal I had compared with some of the outline work that was showing through. I'll pop that up on screen now a moment. And these particular sailing boats are, they've got blue sails, so I thought, well, it might be nice to do a similar treatment for these boats as well and make use of that orange-blue complementary colour. So you can see I'm just very loosely putting in the outlines of the first of the boats on the water there. Now this is the view from Pirates Cove, so you may remember from a couple of minutes ago, the lady who was there with the dogs, she recommended go to Pirates Cove, and so this is just a few hundred yards away. We didn't actually see any more jellyfish, but taking that little walk of a few hundred yards from the marina back round to here, it reminded me of a visit. You can see I've put in the outlines of the other two boats there. But the trip to Pirates Cove reminded me of a visit we took back last summer when it was a blazing hot summer. So around about 9 months ago, back in July, August. And it reminded me of some footage and some reference photos I took of boats on the water. And I thought, oh, I need to get round to doing those paintings. So it's kind of, this is the way my mind works, okay? So an encounter with large jellyfish leads me to a location, and then that reminds me of something I should have done 9 months ago. That's just the way it works. So that's part of the reason I wanted to share the images of the jellyfish with you. So I'll come back to the blue lines I did in just a moment, but we're back just further around the corner from Pirates Cove. We're actually looking right up the river towards Exeter. So this is the riverbed we're walking on here. Loads and loads of little pebbles, and so that entire expanse of sort of yellowy sand and pebbles you can see is the river. And at high tide, nearly all of that will be flooded. So it's a wonderful environment to walk around in. There's always something going on. It's always changing. Beautiful area, and just really, really unique little environment, really. So the blue lines I put down with acrylic paint marker, and you can see I've just outlined the hills on the other side of the river there. And now I'm coming in with some iridescent antique gold, also acrylic. And I'm putting that down on in a dry brush fashion, so I'm keeping the pressure on the paper pretty light and delicate. So that gives a nice textured horizontal mark. And iridescent paints, they have a slight colour shift as you change viewing angle. So I thought it would be good to include that as an underlayer, just to introduce perhaps a little bit of sparkle on the water. Now the boats you can see sailing across the picture here from left to right with the blue sails, it's those boats that are the inspiration for today's painting. So I just really loved the way the blue was catching the light and also the silvery light on the water. So I'm going to do a painting, as you probably guessed by now, it's a mixed media painting this week, partially inspired by that scene. So I'm not looking to capture it exactly, but I want to get a flavour of what's going on in that scene in my painting. But obviously I'll simplify certain areas and I'll be selective in terms of what I paint. So the acrylic paint is completely dry now, and I'm using a big round brush to put down a layer of just clear water over the sky. And that's going to help the watercolour paint I'm about to apply now, so nice blue for the sky, that's going to help it flow across the surface of the painting really easily, but it's also going to automatically create lots of interesting texture and brush marks as well. So I'm just being really loose and haphazard here, really just getting the white of the paper covered. And now I'm just, as you can see, just mixing up a slightly different blue, adding it to the one I had already mixed. And as you can also see, I haven't cleaned up my watercolour kit from that time by the weir next to the River Exe. I must get around to doing that at some point, but I wouldn't hold your breath. So now I'm putting on a darker blue on top, mostly for the upper part of the sky. And now coming in with some scrunched up paper towel to lift off some of that colour. So if you saw on the footage before, there were quite a lot of clouds in the sky, and I don't intend to capture those in their totality, but I want to suggest, a texture to the sky, and it's not just a pure blank, even colour of blue. Having lifted off some of that paint to create white areas, now coming in with a slightly darker blue and the same round brush, but I'm making use of the frayed edge of the brush, the frayed bristles, rolling it across the paper, and then, as you can see, using the paper towel to lift off some of those areas as well. So I've kind of suggested a sky. And you can see also the colour of the water here is blue, generally speaking, but it's darker than the sky blue. So we'll come to that in just a moment. Now I've mixed up kind of a grey, bluey, purpley colour, and I've just used that to block in the most distant hills. Those are the Holden Hills, I believe, off in the distance there. And again, I'm lifting off some of that with the paper towel just to soften the treatment that I've used in that area. So apologies for the camera work here. This little section I'm just filming with my phone handheld. I will correct that for you in just a couple of seconds. But what I'm doing is putting a slightly warmer greeny, it's still an off green, it's still kind of browny for the hills. And now I'm coming in with a warmer green over the top of those areas and filling in all of the hills. And much like I did with the sky, the watercolour paint, it's a really lovely way of very quickly introducing texture and unique marks just by using a kind of haphazard random treatment with the brush. So you can just block in great swathes of the painting really loosely. Now I just wanted to show you this little clip of the guy launching the sailboat here, and if you go back to the thumbnail sketches, I actually did a thumbnail sketch inspired by that little scene. So I hope to do a painting inspired by that little scene at some point in the near future. I think that could be quite cool. So now I'm doing a similar treatment for the lower half of the painting that I did for the upper half. I've just coated the painting with clear water, and now I'm coming in with that deeper blue that we mentioned a moment ago when we saw the last clip but one. So generally speaking, it's difficult to generalise, but generally speaking, when light is reflected off of a surface, the reflected light will be darker in colour than the thing it's reflecting, because less of the light gets reflected compared to the light which hits the reflecting item. So I put on a deeper blue, I'm lifting some off again with the dry paper towel. Again, the paper towel scrunched up, I want a randomness to that lift off. And now for the lower half of the water, I'm not doing this bit for the whole water, I'm putting on an even darker blue. And again, the blue's a little bit off blue, I've put a little bit of burnt umber in there. And again, I'm lifting off some of that in a random way. So very quickly with the watercolour, because we're working over the top of dry acrylic, my original, oh, look at the beautiful water. I wanted to show you that as well. Lovely clear colours, great to sort of walk around in through the shallows. And again, I'm showing you these clips mingled in with the artwork because I wanted to try and create some of the feeling that I have when I'm working away. I'm constantly looking back at the video reference and going back and forth between my work and the experience. So I think what I was saying was, that putting watercolour down on top of the dried acrylic is a really good way to put in quick washes of colour, but of course the acrylic won't go anywhere because it's waterproof, so you don't lose any of your initial drawing. You don't have to worry about that. So now I've actually switched to a 1/4 inch wide flat synthetic brush, and I'm using interactive acrylic. And as you can see, I'm putting down a nice loose treatment of the woods and the hedges and the trees off on the hills there. So for the most distant hills, I won't be adding any more detail because I want to keep those off in the far distance. But the hills just the other side of the water, they're close enough that they do need some further features included. I'm not depicting each individual tree super carefully. I'm not really even mapping out the layout of the fields and the shapes of the fields exactly. I'm just trying to get a feeling of that part of the countryside. So I've used a particular type of green for most of what I just did, although I did change the colour as I went off to the left. And now it's a little bit more of a violet, a little bit more of a purpley green. So it's a nice thing to do to change the colour you apply just a little bit as you move from one part of the landscape to another, because obviously the trees that grow in one area won't be identical to those that grow in another. They will be subjected to, even if they're the same type of tree, they'll be subjected to slightly different weather conditions or different lighting conditions, and consequently there'll be a slightly different hue in one part of the landscape to another. So we're keeping the treatment nice and simple here, and we're doing the same thing for the little strip of beach off on the other side of the water. Now the sand over there, if you were standing on it, would just be golden yellowy, but viewed from this distance it looked actually kind of pale violet. So I imagine that's because the sand was wet and some of the sky was reflecting in that wet sand. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm just putting on a narrow strip of pale violet, and then on top of that, still using the interactives, I've added a little bit of titanium white, and I'm just putting on a few areas where the light is catching. So here's another clip of the scene here. So it was a really hot summer actually when I took this footage, and this is another subject of one of the little thumbnails where there was almost a little collision between these two small boats. So that's another painting I need to do in the future. But having used the watercolour and the interactive acrylic to deal with most of the landscape in terms of the initial treatment at least, I'm now putting in the blue of the sails. So putting on the interactive acrylics more thickly, slightly, than I did for the hedges and the trees, because I want to cover up those watercolour washes and really make it clear that these sails are for the most part completely opaque. So by putting on these thicker, brighter colours, my hope is it's going to push that landscape off into the distance so that the boats seem much closer to us compared to the hills and the pale blue of the sky. And as mentioned earlier, when I put the steer up on the screen, the steer painting, I'm going to deliberately leave some of the orange outline showing. If I go over it in certain areas, that's fine, but my hope is that there will be, at the very least, a few little bursts of colour showing through. Now, of course, those orange outlines aren't there at all in reality, but that's just something I've chosen to do. Now, for the left-hand sail here, I'm going to leave the left-hand edge at this stage rather roughly treated to suggest a little bit of movement. Perhaps the sail is fluttering in the breeze a little bit there. And I'm not being quite so careful as I was with the right-hand sail, but hopefully you can see now that just by blocking in those two triangles of colour, it started to push the landscape back into the distance. So I quite like the interplay of the bright blue against the pale blue of the sky at the moment. And now I've added some titanium white to the blue mix, and I'm adding some highlights. Now normally when I would do this with the interactive acrylics, if you've seen previous videos, as you know, you can blend these acrylics by spraying the painting with water. But for today's painting, I was a little bit wary about spraying the painting with water because I'd used watercolour for the underlayers. I didn't want to risk inadvertently lifting off some of the work I'd done already. So what I'm doing is I'm not worrying too much about blending, but if I do want to blend, I'll just do it by keeping my colours much closer together and working a little bit more quickly and having my brush a little bit wetter than usual. But I'm not overly concerned really. So another quick look back at the beautiful scenery, just to kind of remind ourselves. And that's actually me wading through the water there. Thought I'd share that bit of the experience with you as well. It really, as I said, it really is an idyllic little environment to explore. It's really cool. And, you know, I mean, even just looking down into the shallows here with all the wonderful pebbles and the light catching on the water, that alone could be the subject of a painting. So, you know, pretty much every angle you look at, you've got something to paint. So, as you can see, I've given a similar treatment to the other two sets of sails. And I'm coming in now with my small round brush, and I'm adding on a few little licks of detail using a darker blue. So my palette today, I didn't mention that, my palette is titanium white, burnt umber, phthalo blue, cadmium yellow deep, and permanent alizarin. And if you've seen recent videos with the Angus bulls and the peacock painting I did, not the peacock painting, the pheasant painting, those are the colours that I'm using at the moment and really enjoying the new sort of spectrum of colours that I can get. So a few little licks of detail to start to suggest shadow on the sails. And you know, even the sails are constantly changing as the boat moves along, as the wind catches them, the little shadows cast on the sails, you know, change all the time. The light playing across the sails changes all the time. Now I'm doing something similar with the sail here, which isn't completely unfurled, but notice that the areas of dark I'm putting on are slightly paler than those for the boat on the right. And that's because this central ship, I don't know if it's big enough to count as a ship, but the point is it's further back. And having done a similar treatment to the sail on the left, I'm now starting to paint in the holes of the craft with kind of a bluey purpley dark grey initially, and then lightening certain areas as needed. Now, you know, on the actual video footage, there really is quite a lot of strong backlighting, and the distant hills seem quite a lot darker, but I'm not really going for that full effect. Like I said earlier, I'm just picking out the parts of my reference that I think will make a good painting, and then enjoying freestyling it a bit, basically, to see what I can come up with. So using that same small round brush, I've just been able to indicate the silhouette of the first guy on the boat there, and then just keeping things really simple, suggesting the presence of a second person there too. And we can do that kind of treatment on the other two boats as well. But before we get to that, just need to add a little bit of light catching the hull of the ship. So even when something's backlit, you know, it's a good tip to kind of look really carefully at those shadows and see the slight variations in tone that you get. So we'll give a similar treatment to the boat on the right. So here we're just around the corner, back towards the beach at Exmouth, and you can see, you know, again, another, you know, that again could be a painting. It's just a really cool place to explore, and you know, really magical being by the water. So I find looking back at these little clips, it kind of helps keep me in the right mindset as I'm painting away, rather than getting too fussy and too almost introverted, really, you know, in terms of thinking of the painting you're creating as being the world. And while I was chatting there, you can see I've introduced figures on the other two boats and a little bit of a suggestion of a mast. Now, the reflections in the water on this particular day, because of the way the light was catching the water, and because the water is quite ripply and choppy, there weren't really too many clear reflections of the boats on the water. But I am just suggesting the presence of some reflections here, and I'll cover up some of that in a bit. But you know, when you've got a choppy surface and you know, very, very bright light at a particular angle, you don't always get that mirror-like reflection. So we just want a suggestion that, yeah, there is some reflection there. Now what I'm doing here, again with the flat brush, is I've got a pale blue and then titanium white, and you can see that I've got a mixture of those two colours. So I've only got the blue on one corner of the brush, and so by dragging that across the painting at different angles and different positions of the brush, I can automatically get some colour mixing going on. And that's a nice way to suggest light playing across the surface of the water. And I'm keeping these marks pretty big here and broad, generally speaking, right at the front of the painting. Now, if I was doing it for another quick clip of those blue boats, just to kind of remind us of what we're trying to depict here. So you see, I'm using a little bit of artistic license there, because in the video footage you can't really see, you know, detail on the water at all. You know, I did actually zoom in on some of the stills from the video to have a closer look, but even there, there's not a huge amount of detail. Now I've changed to a pale purple, and notice I'm using the narrow edge of the brush here to make a narrower mark as we go off into the distance or towards the distance for the painting. And then off in the very distance, a much paler light where you tend to get a purer white reflection the further off you go into the distance on the surface of water. But I decided not to add too much of that, because adding a bit and a bit more reflection on the distant shore there. But I actually quite liked the underlayer of watercolour and the gold acrylic. I thought the effect was quite nice, especially next to the rather bolder treatment and brighter treatment I've given the water which is closest to us. So as you can see, I'm obliterating some of the reflections that I've got there on that middle boat, but I'm also making sure that the bottom of the boat is as close to perfect horizontal line as possible, because if it's not, it doesn't really look all that convincing. It doesn't look like the boats are resting on water. So hopefully you agree that the painting's starting to come together now. And so having just done that horizontal brushstroke treatment for those two boats on the left, doing something similar on the right, but deliberately adding some more colour there, some blue and some almost pinky purple, just to change the lighting a little bit. And now I decided, well, having obliterated some of my reflection, I thought, again, a bit of artistic license, I'll very likely suggest a bit more reflection for that right hand sailing. So again, you can see the clouds in reality in the sky, there's much more going on. I've kept that very simple. Really want to make the boats the focus of things. And so with that in mind, I'm now just adding the merest suggestion of a couple of other boats off in the distance. Because if you remember from the clip just a moment ago, the river is really, really crowded with boats. I mean, they're all over the place. I haven't counted, but you know, there's got to be at least 50 in that little clip I just showed. No intention of trying to depict all of those, but we do want to help enhance the sense of depth by suggesting some ships off in the distance. So almost no detail there. You know, that little mark might not even be a boat, but it could be, I hope. You know, that's my intention, that to suggest that there's another boat out there with a mast. And I'm doing something similar here with a slightly different colour. So the idea is you've got this main boat in the foreground on the right with the most colour and the highest contrast in terms of shadows and things. The other two, it's a subtle change, but they are slightly less contrasty and less bright. And then we've got these other two things off in the distance. And I'm just adding a couple of little bursts of highlight colour onto the clothing of the two silhouetted figures there on the right hand boat. So, you know, generally speaking, you know, you want more detail for the foreground and less for the background. But I try to work in as minimalist a way as possible when I can. So I'll try and add as little as possible to get the effect that I want, basically. So you want to try and avoid overdoing it, and that's always a challenge, I feel, when we're painting away, is when do I stop? And I actually painted this particular painting in stages. So I did the line work fairly quickly in a few minutes, and then I did the watercolour washes fairly quickly in a few minutes on a different day. And then most of the acrylic work was done in a single sitting. But you can see I'm just adding little licks of subtle highlight, try not to overdo it, here and there, to just try and bring different parts of the painting to life. Now these particular, I don't know whether they're part of a club, and that's why they've all got blue sails. I'm guessing that might be the reason. But the sails all have different numbers on them and different writing. So that's a good technique to just include little bursts of writing to add a little bit more detail. And you can also suggest the shape of the sail as well. So this particular sail is fairly flat. So I don't want people to worry about reading what's on the sails, but just to indicate that there is a bit of lettering there. And now I'm coming in with a few highlights. And you can see I've added lettering and numbers to the other sails as well, hopefully in such a way to help suggest some contours, the shape that the sail is making in the breeze. I just felt that the bottom of that hole on the right, it still wasn't quite horizontal enough. It looked like it was going a little bit uphill to the left. So I'm just adding a bit more shadow there underneath that right-hand boat to try and make that boat sit in the water just a little bit better. And I feel just that little addition of dark has helped quite a lot. So we're adding a little bit more of that now. You can see I'm using a 1-inch wide flat synthetic brush here. And again, I'm keeping the mark making fairly sort of dry brush in style. The sort of random element you get when you're not overly fussy, I feel adds to the feeling of the painting in this case. That sort of sketchiness, I guess. Now we've got a lot of orange outline showing still, perhaps a little bit more than I intended initially. So I'm coming in with a dark blue and adding some sort of detailed lines of shadow here and there to suggest the mast, and also different parts of the framework of the sail that are in shadow, and also to kill some of that fluorescent orange. On the other two, it's not too bad actually. I quite like the bits of orange that are showing, but I feel the right-hand one I definitely needed to to add a lot more dark there. So the final image wasn't too garish. I wanted a sense of light catching and luminosity from the orange, but I don't want it to be just too overly bright. It's just meant to be a little burst, a little touch of colour there. So there's the finished painting. So it looks, the colours come through much more clearly on the still photograph than on the video footage. So I hope you feel I've captured a sense of the light on that particular day. And that's pretty much it for this painting. So thanks very much for watching. As usual, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you next Sunday for the next episode of The Sunday Art Show. Thanks again for watching.